great to be here with everyone. I'm Joss. I'm based here in London, and I set up SI, Systems Innovation Network, about 10 years ago. My background's in design and technology. I came across complexity theory and systems thinking. I'm not sure if you've heard of those ideas here. About 10 years ago, and got really fascinated by those ideas, and then kind of made that connection between these wicked challenges we have in the world, like moving to a circular economy or many others, and this new way of thinking and needing new ideas, because those are systemic challenges, really. And often we're kind of recreating our own problems, right, with our ways of thinking, bringing in old logic to a new reality, a new world of incredible complexity, right? And if we don't start thinking differently, if we don't kind of move away from linear thinking, we're going to go on perpetuating the same kind of problems. So I set up SI initially as an e-learning platform to try and take those ideas and make them accessible to people, because quite often they're a bit, well, a lot of them come from quite technical areas, maths and science, and really wanted to make them accessible to non-technical people, so that they could, apply them towards their work in many different areas. So started that about 8 years ago, e-learning platform, producing a lot of video courses, a lot of interest. They've been watched over 10 million times. And about 4 years ago, we shifted to more of a community kind of model, or building a community around that, because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life talking about this stuff and just ideas and education. Felt that actually, if we want to make some changes, that's actually about bringing people together and kind of connecting across many different areas. And that's one of the great things about systems thinking, that it has application in a lot of different areas. So it's quite cross-cutting, and that creates an amazing opportunity to bring people together from very diverse areas and see and create new connections. So I've been working on that for the past 4 years, building the SI community. We started with a conference in Barcelona and then in London, started building it online, developing the community online. So it's about 23,000 members at this stage, all around the world. They're all interested in taking systems thinking ideas and applying them to address kind of wicked challenges, because they recognize the need for embracing complexity rather than kind of fighting against it, right? And we developed that community, particularly through a set of hubs. We have about 20 location and thematic hubs in which we explore what systems innovation means in a particular location, like Sydney or Buenos Aires, or 12 different locations around the planet, including London, and then in different thematic areas like finance or energy or food and so forth.
Thank you for that, Joss. So, I mean, I've gone and put the link to your, well, so it starts off as a website and then click explore, and that then takes us into this wonderful kind of e-learning platform. Do you want to just explain, so why have you built it that way? Because it's quite a different way of thinking about making things available to people online, maybe for many of the people that are listening into this now.
Yeah. So I guess the difference is a website versus a community, a social network, right? And it really goes to the essence of kind of the organization that we are, that we don't feel systems innovation or systems change happens by being a closed organization, by being a kind of solutions provider, for other organizations. We feel that it happens by creating a space for collaboration and co-creation. And that's essentially what you see when you go to the website, right? You don't end up on a web page which says, this is our set of services and we'll sell you this. It says, here's a space with many other people that you can connect with, that you can exchange ideas with, that you can join for events and activities to co-learn and start to kind of co-create systems innovation. So yes, it looks a bit messy, right? And that's the way communities are. They have lots of different ideas going in lots of different directions. So yeah, you kind of give up a lot of that order, predictability, centralized control, right? When you try and decentralize to a community in that way. But I think it's the way to really make things happen ultimately, and invite participation and co-creation, because it kind of has to be like that if you're going to make systems-wide changes. You need different actors from across the system, different areas of the system.
I personally, I think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's the kind of thing that you can go exploring for a long time with regards to lots of wonderful material in there. just thinking about building those bridges into different disciplines or terminology, etc., that people might be more used to. So from a personal perspective, I do a lot of work in the world of risk management, and if you're doing risk management properly, it should be in the form of a system and embracing complexity, etc. Am I interpreting systems thinking as being quite similar to a lot of what we talk about in modern risk management, or am I being fairly arrogant by trying to draw those comparisons there?
Well, I think in all these different areas, there's kind of linear ways of thinking and there's systems ways of thinking. So I think normally, someone who really masters a subject or really understands it will probably be a systems thinker. They'll be understanding it holistically in a comprehensive way, right? So I think there is risk management that's done in kind of a narrow linear way where we just focus on specific problems, right? And specific risks, and we try to predict and control those. I think there's also, this idea of systemic risk that's really risen over the past 10, 20 years. And that's a systems idea, because it's actually the whole system is set up in a way to actually create its own downfall. And we learned about that word from the financial crisis, right? And really learned a lot about actually a whole system can fall to pieces. It's not just one institution, it's not one asset and so forth that we need to look out for. It's actually the whole system can be set up. It can actually organize itself in a way that it reaches a critical, it moves to self-organized criticality, it's called. It reaches to a critical point where a small perturbation can actually bring the collapse of that system. So the financial crisis, those subprime mortgages, they weren't that large a part of the global economy compared to the financial system, but they actually managed to bring the whole thing down and the whole global economy to a grinding halt for a long period. And that's a more systemic view of risk, and we actually see that now across a wide variety of systems. Particularly in the environment, supply chain, so on and so forth. Yeah, the health crisis, right? That was a systems change. What happened in the pandemic? Yeah. So to answer your question, I think yes. I mean, in all these areas, there's different ways of thinking about it, both linear and a systems approach. Yeah.
And so with that, Joss, so our current perhaps education way of thinking, or kind of what we're taught, and certainly the world of incentives, is typically quite linear. How do we disrupt that so we can make it more of a systems approach?
Yeah, I think kind of to disrupt anything, you've got to show people that it's not working, right? And then introduce them to something else. You've got to show them that the approach or method or way of thinking they have at the moment is not actually working, and maybe even that way of thinking is creating the problem. And then there's a different way of doing things, and that will actually lead to the outcomes that they want. So it's quite often that we know the inertia, right? We don't change that easily, particularly when it comes to system change, making a paradigm shift. It's very difficult. And sometimes it's an existential challenge for a system, right? If you're talking about paradigm shift, that's doing looking at things and readjusting your whole logic about how you do things. It takes a lot of time and energy and resources. It's not easy. And the system's not going to do that unless it really sees that it kind of has to, right? So I think that is the first thing, really clearly illustrating to people how the way you're doing things is actually creating the problem, and it's going to keep on creating that problem. And until you change your paradigm or make it more comprehensive or inclusive, you're not going to get the outcomes that you want. So it is things like financial crisis that we had, or even that pandemic, that unfortunately really make us reflect on, is this working? Did we create that financial crisis by our own ways of acting? The way the system is set up, because the actors in the system won't really reflect upon those things until there is those kind of crisis, right? So I think helping people see in a very clear and accessible way how the current paradigm way of operating and so forth is creating their own kind of problems. In climate change, it took us a while to get there for us to really accept that these industrial activity is actually creating this problem of climate change, and not much change was going to happen until we really got there and really said, actually, we're creating this problem and it's a really big problem and we need to do something about it. And now you hear calls for systems change, right? Actually, it's 30, 40 years since we started talking about climate change. And we had those intergovernmental panels. We're on whatever, 27, 28 now. We're quite far down the line. not that much happened, right? 20 years ago. It's only now that people are really saying stuff has really got to change. And they're also saying that government can't do this. Kind of traditional ways of addressing these challenges aren't working. We need to really be thinking inclusively across many different actors in society if we're going to make those kind of systems changes. So I think climate change is one example, financial crisis. We see these more and more, these kind of challenges. Yeah.
So from your experience and understanding with regards to the system that is raw materials, and be that the finding and the extraction of those primary raw materials, or then going into the secondary raw materials, so we've got recycling and the circular economy, etc., coming together. Do you have any thoughts with regards to it as a system?
Yeah, I mean, I might start with flipping the paradigm around in the sense of how do we actually start by, dematerialization, and how do we start by not needing those materials? Because that's a huge leverage point, right? Because if you can reduce a little bit of consumption here, it goes all the way back across the supply chain, doesn't it? And all the energy consumed and so forth. So actually, could we have things like degrowth or, a move away from consumerism? So we don't actually need all those resources. Of course, we need some of them, but definitely I'd start there before we start optimizing and addressing things like supply chain itself. Can we really think about, do we need all those resources? I just saw today Patagonia put a video out, quite a powerful one, about consumerism and us clicking buttons and things coming from faraway places through Amazon and so forth. It's quite a destructive dynamic we've got ourselves in terms of the ease of consumption, promotion of consumption, and we know behind that is vast supply chains and resource extraction across the planet. Can we actually start from the end and say, do we need all that consumption? That's where I'd start. But then, of course, we do need some of it. And how do you dig into the supply chain? Of course, circularity is really that is a systems change if you think about it. I mean, it's a very clear one because we many of us now have got this idea of the linear supply chain and then the circular one, right? And how can we really introduce that? And that's very challenging. I actually have a meeting in an hour with a lady called Didiana who worked with Ellen MacArthur Foundation on their plastics, a collaboration across many large organizations to try and turn the plastics economy, the wrapping on plastics into a circular economy. And we talked before about how challenging it is to get those collaborations, but we know that's kind of core to it. And I do think circular economy, maybe you're familiar with this idea. I mean, we often think about it as, a plastic bag or a bottle, is this circular or so forth. But I think the core of it really does come down to collaboration. If you're going to get a supply chain or a city or something to be circular, that is about how you get a wide variety of actors who normally aren't talking to each other or even know each other across a large system to work together and collaborate. And we know collaboration is quite challenging indeed, but we've got to create the right spaces for that. So for me, when I first think about circular economy now, I kind of shift away from thinking of even materials and recycle this to really how do you get those right collaborations so that all those actors are working together in the right way.
So, I mean, there are lots of collaborations that have come together, I think, to improve, be it trying to use less or design products so that they require less, or reuse of those materials within those products, etc. Because to be honest, recycling is actually a bit of a disaster if you get to that point where you're having to melt something down, pull it apart and stick it, kind of start again. So those collaborations between, be it the people who are experts in the materials, the designers, the technologists, etc. Do you have any final hints or tips as to how we can improve that collaboration?
Yeah, it's what I've been working on. This collaboration thing is really core to systems innovation. And I've definitely seen the challenges of that, when you speak to people about a bigger vision or the system and all this stuff, it really doesn't work. You do need to, I'm sure you appreciate this, right? Really find a way for that speaks to them, their needs, their challenges, and the opportunities, and so forth. And then, of course, a pathway for them to be involved in that. So, I mean, it is at the core of systems innovation. How do you understand these different actors and how they're looking at the system and at the challenge? Because they all have different views, right? And if you aren't able to really understand those and really understand where they're coming from, their incentives, their motivations, And of course, the potential opportunity here, if we do collaborate, right, and really articulate that in a clear way. So I think it does kind of require really digging into that. Actually, there's no simple solution there. We have, you know, actor mapping and systems mapping, I think would be core to this, really understanding that system. So that you can understand the actors and where they're coming from, different perspectives, their motives and incentives and so forth, and then actually craft a narrative that really resonates with them, really speaks to their kind of core value proposition and so forth. And then, of course, a good structure to really engage them in that process and taking them on that journey. So I feel like all of that stuff needs to be in place.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Joss. We greatly appreciate you giving up your time to come along and share everything about systems, etc., with us here today. We'll be sharing the website and platform with everyone. But thank you very, very much, and good luck with your meetings later on.
Thank you very much. Nice talking, Sarah. Talk to you soon.